Welcome back to Let's Make a Game. In this video, I would like to talk about my decision to start with a very small number of spells. If you watched my previous video, you might have seen the icons that I have for spells, and you might have noticed that there's only 6. And that is very, very small for games of this type. It's small for computer games of this type. It's also small for tabletop games that have a similar theme. And so I wanted to spend this video explaining why I made the decision to do that. So let's consider a typical game with a theme similar to this one. You might have spells where one spell is it shoots lightning at your enemies, another spell curses your enemies to make them weaker, another spell puts a magic armor around you, another spell inspires your allies so that they are sort of fiercer in combat, another spell turns you into a wolf or a bear or something so that you can fight more effectively, and so on. And they all sound like different effects, and in a sense they are, but ultimately they're all just making you better in combat. So are they really different? Well, partly it depends, I suppose, on how tactical the combat is. If you've got a lot of choices that you're making in combat, then it might well be that it is an interesting choice whether to take the armor spell or to turn into a wolf spell or something else. And knowing which one to use against which enemy might also be an interesting choice, because particular ones might be useful against enemies with particular stats and so on. First of all, that's not this game. It isn't based on sort of tactical combat. It isn't based on detailed differentiation between the combat stats of the of enemies. So there isn't a lot of room for mechanical differentiation between, well, this spell makes you better at combat in a particular way and this spell makes you better at combat in a different way. There isn't a lot of things I can do, given the type of game that I'm trying to make, to actually make those things different. And secondly, even in games where there is detailed combat, I've often found that it isn't really a choice. Certainly in early editions of Dungeons & Dragons, a magic user, a wizard, has a choice of quite a few spells, but at least in the editions that I've played most, the earlier editions, the correct one is sleep. There's a bunch of others that will, maybe help you in combat, but you want to take sleep. It's just way better. And so you have a choice, but in another sense, you really sort of don't have a choice. It's just that, and they are different, but in another way, they're not so much different. It's just this one's the better one. And similarly, clerics, who are sort of priests, they have a bunch of spells, but the correct one is Cure Light Wounds. That one is way better than any other one, and it's the one that people will take if they either know the game or even if just they're new and say, okay, so which spell should I take? People usually would say, yeah, take Cure Light Wounds. That's the best one. And that is a differentiation that I don't like. I'd rather not have the different options. If the different options are going to be just worse, I'd rather have fewer spells. And that's sort of what I'm aiming to do. I'm aiming to have a small number of spells, but they do genuinely different things. And ideally, they're all roughly as useful as each other. So it's not that you get a spell and go, oh, this is an absolute corner case that I'm never going to use. Or you get one and go, great, that's the good one that helped. That's the good one that makes me win the game. But instead, when you get a spell, you say, okay, that's going to help me in particular situations. And that means that I can alter the strategy of what I'm doing in particular ways. In other words, it's ideally, and of course I'm not saying this is how it's going to be from the first time that I get this system up, but because that's what playtesting is for. But ideally, eventually, I would like a system where any spell you get, okay, that has some use, but it's not the best one that wins me the game, but it is one that helps me in particular situations, and it adjusts the resources that I have and how I think about the choices that I make. And obviously, achieving that is going to be easier with 6 spells than with 40 spells, or with whatever number that approaches the sort of number that would be more typical for a game of this type. Given that I want the spells to do different things, each spell requires its own sort of custom coding. I have to sort of hand add in the situations in which you can use the different spells. It's not a matter of saying, okay, well, I've got a spell that does 1d8 damage and it's not effective against vampires, and this is just the same as that, except it does 2d6 damage and it has a slightly higher range. I can't, and it doesn't have any disadvantage against vampires. In other words, I can't just, I don't believe that I'll be able to, having programmed one spell, just go, okay, well, this spell's pretty much the same as that, except for minor variations. Each one will have to be coded separately, and therefore each new spell is kind of more work. Because, again, ideally, they are of different types. They are genuinely different. They are used in different situations. They're not just different in the flavour of what they do and in the sort of fictional explanation of what's happening. And that's the main reason. There is a sort of second line of thought that's led me to this, and that is that it is easy to add to a system without wasting work that you've done, as opposed to shrinking down a system without wasting work that you've done. In other words, if I code 6 spells and go, you know what, this isn't nearly enough, I actually realise that I need at least another 5 or 6, well, I haven't wasted the ones that I have, really. Depending on what I do, but generally speaking, I will still be able to use the work that I've already put in. Whereas, let's say I go, right, I need 40 spells. I need to design and define the parameters of 40 different spells. And then halfway through, I go, you know what, 40 is way too much. I'm going to have to cut it down to 15. Well, I'm going to have wasted a lot of the work that I've done, probably, right? I'm going to have, at the very least, probably found 40 different icons, and I'm going to have to get rid of 25 of those. And I've come up with 40, hopefully, evocative names, and I've got to get rid of 25 of those, and so on. So it's a matter of wanting to minimise the risk, and not eliminate the risk, but minimise the risk that I will do work that subsequent revisions will render useless. So those are my reasons. That is my reasoning. It may turn out to be wrong. I can't really say for sure what the game is going to be like before playtesting. It would be, I think if I had that attitude, I wouldn't get the full value out of the playtesting when I get up to it. I suppose a minor reason, perhaps just to backtrack a bit, a third reason is just that I have read advice about game design which says that you want to get to playtesting as soon as possible. And that means making each system as quickly as possible, and that means making each system as simple as possible. In other words, all right, I want to code a magic system before I do playtesting. Well, a magic system with 6 spells is probably going to be quicker for me to do than a magic system with 40 spells. Now, I haven't been entirely consistent with that, of course. I could have, I could have just had no spells and finished it. So why didn't I do that? Well, because I'm not completely consistent, and there are certain things that sort of make me enthusiastic and make me want to go, yeah, I definitely want to code that as soon as possible. So that sort of works against my more more calm sort of mode of thinking, which is okay. Let's not get super excited and rush off and do a bunch of things. Let's get this done as simply as possible. Let's think about the minimum amount of work we need to get this done. But still, I mean, I am sort of rational enough that I'm not going to try and design a system with 50 spells. So at least I limited myself to 6. I think you have to have that. You have to have that sort of excitement and enthusiasm if you're doing this as I'm doing it, just as a hobby for free. I mean, I think if you're working professionally and making a game in a studio, well, your motivation is that you want to keep your job, and so you have a sort of motivation built in. But I don't have that motivation, and so if I was completely calm and rational, I would probably conclude, well, the really quickest way to do this is just to not do it at all. So in order to keep doing it, I think I do need to have a bit of excitement and a bit of enthusiasm. But hopefully, I can keep it sort of curbed enough that I don't end up starting things that I can't finish. Anyway, we'll see. Sorry, that was a bit of a sidetrack. But anyway, I wanted to explain why I'd done a thing that was different to what you would normally expect in games of this type. Anyway, so I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.